before we jump to our experts. So standards for residential and commercial appliances, standards for residential and commercial appliances and equipment such as water heaters, EV charging equipment, restaurant food holding cabinets, washers and dryers, and other products similar to those, set a level of efficiency and water that the equipment or appliance can use to operate. So these are minimum standards for the energy and water usage for the equipment or the appliance. And there's a benefit or numerous benefits to having equipment and appliance standards. And those are cost savings. Number one. And so standards phased in since, or standards phased in between now and 2030 are expected to save $1.7 trillion, so a tremendous amount of cost savings from appliance standards. Energy savings, of course. So if you think about just our refrigerators, they only use a third of the energy from those back in the 1970s. So tremendous amount of savings. In fact, it's expected that we'll save 128 quads between now and 2030 of electricity. Energy security, so dependence on energy, and that's from the savings from standards. Standards reduce emissions as well. Since 1987, we've avoided 2.3 billion tons of carbon from appliance standards. Standards drive innovation as well. So product manufacturers, industrial designers, product designers need to keep up with the latest trends in efficiency. And standards also create jobs, and that's through research, manufacturing, and the installation of those appliance standards. So standards can be created at the state level in absence of federal standards. However, federal standards eliminate market barriers because they provide consistency and certainty across the United States and beyond. And this certainty then eliminates the need for state standards. And the federal standards create an economy of scale. They simplify market entry for manufacturers, which all leads back to the cost savings and energy savings. Because of federal standards, the price of products actually is reduced for consumers. The Appliance Standards Awareness Project, ASAP, calls appliance standards the quiet revolution. Standards are the second most impactful energy saving tool after CAFE standards or mile per gallon standards for cars, and that's followed then by building codes. So CAFE standards, appliance standards, and building codes is that trifecta of energy and cost savings for consumers. So today we have two experts. I'm very excited to have Andrew Dulesky, Executive Director of the Appliance Standards Awareness Project, otherwise known as ASAP. And he'll be joining me in conversation about the unprecedented amount of significant federal appliance standards that is happening now, the rulemaking currently undergoing. And then we'll be joined by my colleague, Andrea Krim, and Leah Lewis-Prescott, Senior Associate at Rocky Mountain Institute, to address the emerging standards related to regulating fossil fuels from appliance pollution. So without further ado, I'll invite Andrew to come on camera and we'll begin our discussion. Morning, Andrew. Thanks for joining us. As I mentioned, you are the Executive Director of the Appliance Standards Awareness Project, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about ASAP and the work you do, and then we'll jump into what's happening on the federal level.
Well, thanks, Darren, and thanks to Neat for hosting this webinar and inviting me to participate today. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about appliance equipment and lighting equipment and appliance standards.
Absolutely.
ASAP is a coalition project. I'm based in Boston. Our team is all over the country. We are a coalition that includes participation from consumer groups, low-income advocates, state government, the utility sector, environmental groups, and others that come together collaboratively to work for the advancement of cost-effective energy efficiency standards. We work at both the state and the federal level. Some of you may be familiar with our model legislation that we advance in partnership with NEP and others that has been advanced in multiple states over the past several years. And we're also now have geared up and are deeply involved in advancing progress on new federal efficiency standards for a range of products.
Great.
We're based at ACEEE, so we have a very close affiliation with ACEEE.
Excellent. Great. Well, thanks for that overview of your organization. Yeah, and we're excited to work with ASAP. We do quite a bit of work together, and you definitely have that unique perspective in bringing appliance standards to the states and introducing the annual appliance standards bill, for which states can use to adopt state appliance standard legislation. So perhaps you could jump right in and start with an update of what's happening on the federal rulemaking. It seems like an unprecedented time with the scope and the number of federal rulemaking that's happening. So why don't you tell us what is going on the federal level with the standards?
Sure. So let me start with some breaking news.
Yeah.
Which is that the Washington Post reports this morning that the Biden administration is finally announcing or finalizing new standards for light bulbs. So this has been a long time coming. Those of you who follow appliance standards, and of course, many of us in the efficiency space work very hard to advance LED light bulbs over the past many years. The light bulb standards were put in place by Congress back in 2007. They should have taken effect in 2020. The Trump administration put the kibosh on that. And finally, now the Biden administration today is releasing 2 final rules that will finally implement LED light bulb standards for a wide range of the bulbs commonly used in our homes and also in businesses. So this it's should have happened a long time ago, but it's good that it's finally happening, and will deliver large savings for for about a third of light bulbs sold, believe it or not, are still incandescent or halogen bulbs. Although many consumers have made the switch, many have not, and particularly for people who shop at dollar stores and who have poor access to major retail, to the big box stores. The incandescent bulbs are still selling. So that's good news. The Biden administration, when they came into office, identified about a dozen actions issued under the Trump administration that needed to be reversed or reviewed for potential reversal. So with these 2 rules out today, they've just about finished reversing the harmful rules issued during the Trump years. Took a little longer than we would have liked to get those Trump rules reversed, but it's good news that they are by and large now reversed. And those actions issued under the prior administration had undercut a number of existing standards, creating loopholes in them or creating opportunities for manufacturers to sell non-compliant products, and also had set up barriers and hurdles to the issuance of new standards. So it's good to see those reversals now just about all completed. The administration.
So what will the light bulb standards mean for the consumer when they go into the store? What are they going to see that will be different?
So the technical standard is a 45 lumen per watt standard. It will mean that the existing halogen incandescent bulbs will no longer be available, and any incandescent bulb, that's not yet at the halogen level as well. So there's no incandescent bulb that can meet 45 lumens per watt. Of course, LEDs are around 90 lumens per watt. CFLs can meet this technical standard, but most retailers, some manufacturers and most retailers are heading toward phasing out CFLs anyway. So it really means that consumers will see a wide range of LED products at any outlet that sells light bulbs.
Excellent.
So then complete, just to finish touching on sort of the update. So the administration is working on updates to about 50 standards. So we saw progress, we saw early stage rulemaking work over the past 12 months for about 50 categories of products. So that's all good news. And just 2 weeks ago, the administration proposed its first new standards that it developed, covering residential, covering window air conditioners and pool heaters.
Great. So what of the 50, what do you think will be the most cost savings or the most significant?
Sure. So we published a report in
Yep.
Fall of 2020 that sort of assessed the potential for the standards that can be issued during the current presidential term. And actually, I showed a slide. If you show the slide with the bar chart, it shows the standards that have the largest potential savings.
Okay.
Go to that slide. That will help the viewers see.
Great. Yeah. Do we have that slide?
Yeah. So again, we assessed approximately 50 products for their potential savings under two scenarios. On the left-hand side is the AEO reference case, so sort of a business as usual scenario. And on the right-hand side, we did a scenario where under a low carbon grid scenario. So of course, as the power grid gets cleaner, the carbon savings from standards that save electricity will go down, which makes the gas saving measures all that much more important. So the top measures are water heaters under both scenarios, and that's really driven by the potential shift to heat pump water heaters. That's a huge measure under any scenario. Furnaces is also really big, and we're expecting a furnace proposed standard within the next couple of weeks. So to finally move the market towards condensing levels of efficiency is a big saving measure. The rest of the list is really a mixture of products, some commercial and industrial products. Light bulbs is on there. Refrigerators is another. We've already reduced refrigerator energy use by an enormous amount compared to the 1970s, as Darren referenced in the opening remarks, but there's another bite at that apple, and we can still save a lot more with improved refrigerator standards. And then I want to also point out that bottom bar, others. So it's not just the top ones that matter. It's really completing the entire group of about 50 standards that are due for renewal, for updates during this presidential term. Because when you combine all the other ones, all the quote unquote small ones, they add up to a number that's even bigger than water heaters. So it's important that the administration move on the whole gamut of potential new standards.
How many new standards are expected from the Biden administration?
Like I said, about 50 new standards are due for updates during this presidential term.
Okay, so give us some gauge compared to other administrations that have worked with appliance standards. How many under Obama administration?
Sure. So the Obama administration completed 50 standards during its 8 years in office.
Okay.
We're looking for the Biden administration to do around double the rate of work.
Yeah.
And that's not just because we want them to, that's because the law requires them to. The law requires the department to update, review every standard once every 6 years. And because the Trump administration ignored that requirement, everything's coming due during the current presidential term.
Excellent. Good. And are there any new product categories in this rulemaking?
Yeah, there are.
Yep.
So DOE doesn't just update existing standards, they also have an obligation, or I would say an opportunity, to consider standards for products that don't yet have existing federal standards. So some of the things that are being reviewed or considered for newly covered are mostly things coming out of our state work, things that folks have adopted into state laws that are now sort of bubbling up to the federal level. These include pool pumps, commercial and industrial fans, spas. Another one is hearth products, so gas hearth products, and then also portable air cleaners, or product that went from selling about 5 million units a year to 15 million units a year over the past few years in light of COVID, in light of wildfires. It's become a very popular product that it's a bit of a wild west in terms of its the regulatory world for it. So having standard for air cleaners could do a lot to save energy and also ensure consumers are getting a reasonable level of performance.
Great, thanks. So just one more question for this segment, and then we'll circle back. But how can regional stakeholders help enable strong federal standards?
Sure. If you go to the slide I shared, which shows our tracker, that's something I could use to help sort of describe that.
Okay. While they're getting that slide, I believe it was Washington, D.C. was the first to adopt for the air purifiers.
Yeah, it's now been adopted by Washington, New Jersey, Maryland, and Washington State.
Yeah,
as well. So we just launched this tracker last week, and it's a way that we've got it up on the ASAP website. It's a place for people to go to see how's the Biden administration doing against this, what we see as the potential of saving 3 gigatons of carbon emissions from standards adopted during this presidential term and reducing consumer utility bills by $230 a year on average by 2035. You can see that they haven't gotten very far yet, 15 months into the new administration. The bar at the bottom now will be filled in since the light bulb standards have now been finalized as of this morning. But there's a long way to go. So the box on the right shows you what's coming up. So this is a place to go to keep track of, see how the administration is doing, and for folks to potentially get involved in weighing in on proposed standards. So the box on the right will tell you what's coming up. And when a rule is proposed, stakeholders have the opportunity to offer their views, and certainly be in touch with us at ASAP if you're interested in how best to have your views heard. Signing on to our joint comments is another opportunity. If you go to the next slide, we have our contact information, and that's a way for you to be in touch with us about ways to get involved, ways to get involved in weighing in with on the federal standard setting process.
Great. Well, thank you, Andrew. It's an exciting time. And yeah, we'll look forward to having you back in just a few minutes. We'll have Leah come up and talk about regulating fossil fuel appliance pollution. And then we'll open it back up for questions for both of you.
All right. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. See you in a bit.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Andrew. That was great, kind of hearing what's going on the federal level. And now Leah and I are kind of going to shift a little bit and more focus on the upcoming topic of emissions-based appliance standards. And thanks to Leah for joining us. I know it's early in the morning in California, and we really appreciate you joining us. And my name is Andrea Krim. I'm a building policy manager at NEEP on the Codes and Standards team. And before we dive into these questions, would you mind giving us a quick introduction of yourself and kind of the work you're doing in this space at RMI?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm Leah Lewis Prescott. I'm a senior associate on RMI's Carbon-Free Buildings team. So RMI, we are an independent nonprofit working for 40 years to accelerate the global clean energy transition worldwide and really limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And on the Carbon-Free Buildings team, my work has really been focused on decarbonizing buildings across the US. I work primarily in the Western region, but the work that we're talking about today, addressing appliance emission standards, we are working on across the US.
Great, thank you so much. And so we'll just dive in and I'll just ask the biggest general question I have, and what are emissions-based appliance standards?
Yeah, so emission-based appliance standards it's a regulation that limits the amount of pollution that a new appliance can emit. So folks tend to think about appliance standards, they think about energy efficiency standards that you heard from Andrew. But efficiency standards are focused on the performance of the appliance, meeting some minimum efficiency, right? Emission standards are limiting the amount of a certain pollutant that can be emitted from an appliance. And so in that sense, they can be a really powerful tool for addressing building pollution, building decarbonization, helping to address climate emissions and improve health and air quality for folks.
Great, and I just want to remind everyone, please feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A for Leah or Andrew. We will be having a session right after Leah and I speak with everybody. And so feel free to drop anything at any time and we'll make sure to get to it in our Q&A session. And so off of that, how are these different than existing energy standards?
Yeah, again, most of the standards today are really focused on efficiency, regulating appliance performance, and the energy use. So limit the amount of energy to get the same performance or the same output, better performance, same output. But when we're talking about emission standards, we're really saying, let's limit the amount of pollution that is coming from this appliance device. So both are setting limits on appliances, but limiting different things and regulated by different agencies. So efficiency standards are regulated by energy agencies like Department of Energy, whereas pollution and emission standards tend to be regulated by air agencies like the EPA or at state and regional levels, and they can completely complement each other. So zero or appliance emission standards can help advance fuel switching, can move us toward electrification to reduce pollution in a really effective way that efficiency standards can't exactly do. At the same time, emissions standards cannot do anything about efficiency. So having efficiency standards can help ensure that we are adopting electric appliances that are or non-polluting appliances that are really efficient. And then the pollution standards can help us drive towards those non-polluting appliances in general.
And what type of pollutants are generally regulated in these new and upcoming standards?
Yeah, I mean, it could probably be any pollutant that an agency can regulate and deems harmful to health, air quality, or climate. So in that sense, we're seeing, greenhouse gases or carbon dioxide being regulated, especially in states with strong climate legislation. This could be emission standards could be a way to help achieve those strong climate targets. But often we see pollutants that air agencies have a requirement to regulate. So let me step back and unpack that a bit. So under the Clean Air Act, the EPA has to set legal limits on 6 criteria pollutants. There's like 6 pollutants that they know are really dangerous and harmful to public health and to air quality. And these legal limits or these national ambient air quality standards just indicate how much of that pollutant can be released over a given time in a given area. And so states and counties have a legal obligation to meet these standards and meet those legal limits. And when they're not meeting those limits, they have to propose ways in which they will reduce their pollution and meet those standards. So appliance emission standards is one way that counties and states can reduce their pollution, meet those federal requirements, and move toward cleaner air and better health. That being said, you certainly do not need to be a state or a county that is not meeting federal standards to pass appliance emission standards. That can definitely happen for a number of reasons. Again, air quality, health, climate. But if folks are addressing appliance emissions for meeting federal attainment, the most common pollutant that they would regulate is probably nitrogen oxides or NOx, because that forms ozone or smog, which harms our air quality. It also forms nitrogen dioxide, it forms particulate matter, and those are pollutants that are really harmful to our health.
And so where are you currently seeing some of these standards being adopted and hopefully implemented this year?
Yeah, well, so stepping back, appliance emission standards, some places already have appliance emission standards. So places like California, Texas, they're already saying like there's some limit on the amount of NOx that appliances can emit in those places. But the new wave of appliance emission standards that we're seeing is a movement toward zero emissions, which will really drive us away from polluting appliances altogether. And the reason we're seeing that is because we have electric appliances available on the market today, technologically ready, at your local Home Depot that can meet a zero emission standard today. So we are seeing those up for discussion in New Jersey, New York, and California.
Great. And so I know you briefly discussed kind of the EPA's role with the state implementation plans, the non-attainment zones. So how are these standards impacted on the federal level by the EPA?
Well, ideally, the EPA would set its own zero emission appliance standards. So, a federal rule would be hugely impactful because it would set a uniform standard nationwide that brings consistency, regulatory certainty, which is especially important for manufacturers, distributors, and installers to whom these rules really apply. And national standards would also deliver those health, safety, air quality benefits to everyone in the US, help us get closer to meeting those federal pollution standards and really driving benefits for communities across the nation. So ideally, the EPA is setting a federal standard themselves. But in the absence of a federal appliance emission standard, states and regions can continue to pass their own regulation. They don't need federal approval to do so. And any federal standard that does get set at any point in time would become the floor, not the ceiling. So states and regions could always surpass a federal standard and go even further.
And do you think this is on the horizon for the EPA to start creating some national standards?
I hope so. Hard to say, but I certainly hope so. I know that there is growing awareness of the health and air quality benefits that can come from regulating appliances, reducing pollution and emission from appliances. So hopefully that does translate to action.
Great. And so what are some of the general improvements to public health and air quality that these standards can bring both nationally, regionally, and statewide?
Yeah, well, so fossil fuel appliances, especially gas appliances, are really just a major polluter hiding in plain sight. Folks understand that power plants, cars are polluters because you can see the smoke, you can smell the emissions, you can smell car exhaust, right? But with gas appliances, they're emitting a lot of the same pollutants, but it's invisible and it's odorless. And so folks don't necessarily make that connection that these are highly polluting devices, but appliances are emitting high levels of greenhouse gases that are impacting the climate, and nitrogen oxides that, again, can turn into smog, which is terrible for our air, and turn into particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, pollutants that are linked to respiratory illnesses like asthma, and really dangerous to our health. So just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the health and air quality impact here, in northeastern states, appliances emit 5 times as much nitrogen oxide pollution as all of the power plants in the Northeast, despite consuming less gas overall. And again, that's largely because we've done a good job to limit the amount of pollution coming from power plants, but building appliances have largely remained unregulated. And to show what that means in terms of health impacts, Harvard researchers have done some work to quantify the health impacts of this pollution, and they estimate that in just a single year, in northeastern states alone, appliance pollution from residential and commercial buildings was responsible for over 6,000 premature deaths and cost about $24 billion in health impacts. So it's a huge toll on our air quality and our health. And again, unfortunately, folks haven't always made that connection, but I think I'm hopeful that this, more and more people are understanding just how dangerous and polluting our gas appliances and fossil fuel appliances really are.
Wow, yeah, that's a scary stat to look at, but glad we're finally bringing some attention to it, especially in the Northeast. So on that note, what are some of the largest challenges you've seen with adoption of emissions-based appliance standards and the new zero emissions-based appliance standards?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say there are two challenges that I see. One is just inconsistency in local standards, and the other is ensuring equitable and affordable implementation. So starting first with that inconsistent local standards, this piecemeal approach where states and regions can set different emissions limits makes it really tough for manufacturers because then they have different compliance requirements in different areas. So this can really easily be addressed if the EPA were to pass a single federal standard, again, just create that consistency. But this also becomes less of a challenge if we were to move all the way to zero, because if we're doing a low emissions requirements, it may prompt manufacturers to actually have to create a new product that is lower emissions. Whereas the great thing about going all the way to zero is most major manufacturers are already making electric appliances that can meet a zero emission standard today. So it wouldn't necessarily require a new product. It would just signal an increase in ramping up the supply of that appliance. So that's addressing the inconsistent standards. On the equitable and affordable implementation piece, this is really important as we move to zero emission standards to make sure that the rule implementation is going to be done in a way that is affordable and equitable for all residents and business owners. The challenge here is that air agencies with the authority to pass appliance emission standards are not always the agencies or entities that have the ability to address affordability and equity protections. That being said, it can absolutely be done equitably and affordably. It will take a significant and intentional effort from air agencies to coordinate across stakeholders. So 3 things that air agencies can do to help ensure equitable and affordable implementation. First, design appliance emission standards with features that can enable an equitable transition. Second is actually investing themselves in solutions for low-income residents, low-income households to transition. And third, and very importantly, is mobilizing other decision makers to make sure that we can secure the complementary protections. So this is not a new idea. Air agencies, environmental agencies have led multi-stakeholder efforts before, but it will require more effort and innovation from air agencies that takes them beyond kind of that business as usual, recognizing that this would be a first of its kind rule with a massive potential to transform our way of life. Air agencies can lead the way and champion this issue, but they'll need to mobilize a broader group of stakeholders to help address some of the stickier issues along the way.
Great. And I just have one more question for you right before we head back into our larger Q&A. Can you quickly define an air agency and kind of give some examples of what these look like?
Yeah, so air agencies are the regulators that are responsible for making sure that we have clean air and better health, truly. So the US EPA would be our federal air agency, and then each state has its own air agencies as well. I primarily work in California, so I'm thinking the California Air Resources Board, but these are look a little bit different in every state, and some states then also have regional air agencies overseeing, counties, regions, and at each level, all of these regulators are just responsible for making sure we're reducing pollution and keeping our air healthy and keeping our people clean.
Great, thanks. And we're more energy focused, so it's always good to kind of give a background of the pollution side and kind of who's regulating it at all levels. And I want to thank you so much, Leah, for our quick chat. And I'm going to invite Darren and Andrew back on to join us for our larger Q&A session. And again, if you have any questions for either expert, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll make sure to either answer them now or get you more information later. Thanks. And so I'll start it off for both Andrew and Leah. Just a general question about what is the relationship between building energy codes and appliance standards, and how can states make sure that they work together instead of siloed and separate?
Happy to kick off. So I think both building energy codes and appliance standards can help advance decarbonizing buildings. I think building energy codes are a really great way to address new construction. So really focused on new buildings and making sure that when we're building a new building, it is efficient and it is low polluting from the start. I think appliance standards can help to reduce energy use and pollution in existing buildings in a really meaningful way. So they can help to transition the appliance industry more broadly, more holistically. So that's how I see the two really complementing each other and hopefully working together in tandem.
That sounds right. Nothing to add.
Yeah. What about any conflict between appliance standards and codes? I think we find this from time to time where there's some confusion as to who regulates appliance standards as opposed to the codes. And have you come across that at all? And that conflict or that rub between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so on the energy efficiency side, as distinct from the emission standard side, when there is a federal standard for a product, states are generally preempted from setting their own standard or from setting standards in their codes, requirements in their codes that are higher than the federal standards. That said, there are some workarounds, and some states have availed themselves of those workarounds, including Oregon and Washington, to have higher requirements. In other words, the way those workarounds work, if you have alternate pathways to get to the same savings, then you can set requirements that are effectively higher than the federal minimums. And there are some, I think New Building Institute and others have stretch code suggestions and options that states can look at for how to get above and beyond the federal minimum standards in their codes through using some of these alternate pathways for compliance.
Yeah, certainly there's a number of stretch codes that go beyond the minimum standards on the federal and state level, as well as it's in ASHRAE 189. There is a table of standards, options, or appliance efficiencies that are above the federal standards. So that's a workaround in a national standard that will hopefully see that same sort of option adopted into the 2021 international or the 2024 rather International Energy Conservation Code. So, great. So I'll ask another. I think for both Leah and Andrew, can you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and how those ideas are included or considered in appliance standards and pollution standards? Andrew, why don't you start off?
Sure. On it, appliance efficiency standards are designed under the federal law and also through what we recommend at the state level to be cost effective for the people who buy and use the appliances. Particularly over the last few years, there's been a real focus on ensuring that standards that are proposed and adopted, whether it be at the federal level or at the state level, are standards that advance equity by lowering costs for consumers, particularly those with the lowest incomes. To give you an example, the typical household spends about $500 less per year on utility bills today than they would if we didn't have appliance efficiency standards. $500 is real money. For people at with the lowest incomes, that really matters. I also would point out that that low-income households are disproportionately renters, which means they typically don't buy, the appliances in their homes, most of the appliances, but the landlord does. And ensuring that those appliances are efficient is a great tool that you accomplish, a great outcome that you get from efficiency standards, where otherwise landlords may be buying the cheapest product that's also the least efficient product. We have to keep an eye on first cost. It's super important that the costs are manageable and that there are approaches in place to ensure that consumers benefit, and particularly at the lowest income range.
Lee, you want to add to that?
Yeah, a different angle with the emission standards. I would say that equity is at the heart of the emission standards conversation, because pollution does not impact everybody equally. There was a recent study by Tessum and others I can share in the chat later, but they found that residential gas combustion, primarily residential appliances, pollution is higher for BIPOC communities compared to whites. So just exposure to gas appliance pollution rates are not the same across racial and ethnic different groups across the US. And so that's a big problem that we need to address. And we think that appliance emission standards can really help. We see them as being an inclusive solution because they apply to all new appliances. So they apply to new construction. They also apply to newly purchased appliances. When your appliance breaks, you go to get a new one, it's going to be lower emissions. However, as I mentioned briefly before, there are ways in which air regulators or folks enacting these rules can be thoughtful about equitable implementation and making sure that they're designed equitably. So a few examples, setting a future implementation date. That's something we're seeing folks talk about with zero emission appliance standards, saying, okay, by 2030, we're going to move to zero emission standards. Over the next 8 years, we are going to work on addressing the equitable and affordable components. In the Bay Area, we're also seeing them say, okay, we're also going to put in this conditional implementation component. So 2 years before implementation, we're going to do a market assessment, make sure that we believe that these rules can be implemented affordably and equitably. And if not, we may consider delaying. And if so, we can implement on time. So just thinking about different design elements. And again, I think the biggest piece here is mobilizing other stakeholders, because we can get to a point where costs are driving down, zero emission appliances are more affordable for folks, and we are finding the financial and funding solutions to help the low income folks that need it the most. But we need everybody's coordinated effort to make that happen and make the financial and equity components come into play.
Great. So a follow-up to that, are both your organizations work with affordable housing advocates as well as environmental justice organizations to bring these issues to their attention and get them involved when it comes to the adoption, implementation of both appliance standards and air regulations? Is that an active part of your work?
It is. So we work closely with the National Consumer Law Center, with the Consumer Federation of America, with others who focus on consumer impacts and on impacts particularly for low and moderate income households. And what we and they sort of continually come back to is the concept of access. Now, the access to efficient, affordable appliances is really critical. And when standards improve accessibility to the efficient appliances and clean appliances that people need. Access that may not be there, absent the standards. It brings down the cost, and it ensures that when you go to shop, you're going to have a range of efficient, clean, affordable options, and that whether you're a tenant or whether you're a homeowner, you're going to have those options. So those are the messages we consistently hear from people who work, with whose focus of their work is on ensuring, good outcomes for low income households.
Did you want to add
We
something?
similarly are working with a lot of the same folks who we know that these rules and regulations are going to impact most, and making sure that they're part of the conversation on how do we make sure to move forward equitably.
Great. I'm curious if you could speak a little bit about water efficiency. We spoke a lot about energy, but also curious as to how appliance standards are affecting water savings.
It's a big deal for particularly in the western part of the U.S., which is in the midst of a mega drought sparked by climate change. I mean, we are seeing some of the driest conditions, long-term dry conditions throughout the U.S. West, setting stricter standards for water-using products is something that's in the state domain. There are federal standards, but they have unique treatment under the federal law, and preemption has sunsetted for those products. So states can now set stronger standards, despite the fact that there are federal standards for things like shower heads and toilets and faucets. So a number of Northeast states have as well set standards. And of course, when you save water, particularly hot water, you also save energy, and that helps to reduce the climate footprint of those products. So it's a good opportunity for state action. You'll see in that list that I shared earlier that shower heads and other water using products are still top 10 for potential carbon dioxide savings as well. So it's a wonderful opportunity for state action, particularly for states in the dry West.
Andrea, I'll turn it back to you. Do you have another question for?
Yeah, and this one might be more focused toward Leah, but please, Andrew, if you have any information, jump in. I wanted to just quickly ask, I know you briefly, when we were chatting, talked about the relationship between how air pollution is regulated at the state level versus energy at the state level. And so with states that are thinking about adopting and implementing emissions-based appliance standards, how would these be regulated at the state level? Would it be more in an air office with an energy office? Kind of what relationship do you imagine them having?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I would say that this can vary. I think that the clearest authority to address emissions is with the air agencies, very clearly within their wheelhouse, and in fact, like really what they're setting out to do and required to do, right? That being said, where energy offices are involved, it would probably be more in relation to greenhouse gas standards, like connected to energy offices, climate efforts. So again, these emission standards could actually come from state legislation, environmental, climate focused intention to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and the emission standards then focused on greenhouse gases more so than like NOx. And so that's where we might see it actually appear more in the wheelhouse of energy offices. But again, like these are two entities who I think have important roles to play. And I keep coming back to this idea of needing a coordinated interagency effort. I think that regardless of where the standard gets passed, there's work to be done by agencies across the state and probably local levels as well.
Andrea, did you have a follow-up to that, Andrea?
Oh, nope, go ahead.
Nope. All right. So Andrea, can you talk about ASAP's Clean Lamps initiative? Tell audience what that's about?
Sure. So this is a new project based on a report that we published earlier this year that looks at the opportunity to phase out mercury using lamps. States have a long history of regulating mercury. It's a neurotoxin, well known to be very dangerous for human health. And it's also an area that has a rich history of state level regulation. Fluorescent lamps are now no longer necessary, right? LED technology can replace fluorescents in virtually every application, aside from some very specialized industrial applications. At this point, there's really no reason that we should be putting fluorescent lamps that contain mercury into our homes or our offices. So it would be an opportunity for states is to adopt legislation that would eliminate mercury lamps in homes. Europe has adopted such regulations at the EU level. going into effect in the next 18 months, I believe. There's legislation pending now in Vermont and in California. Other states can do the same. And of course, by phasing out fluorescent lamps in favor of LEDs, you also have tremendous CO2 savings, since LEDs use roughly half the energy of fluorescent lamps, as we reduce energy use associated for powering those lamps. So
Yeah.
it's a new initiative that we've been getting involved in.
Sounds like a win-win all around. Covers affordability, environmental justice, pollution reduction, covers all the bases. And how long is the phase out typically that we're looking at here in the States?
Could happen very quickly.
Yeah.
Where we think a state could put this into effect within 18 months or 2 years.
Yeah.
There's plenty of LED replacement lamps on the market.
Right. Great. Thanks. And so you have, is it a model bill that ASAP offers the states and technical assistance? Is that...
We offer that kind of assistance, yes. So you haven't got model legislation, but there is, there's the California bill, there's the Vermont bill. So there are a couple of models out there that one can pull from.
Great. Thanks. So I think to wrap up, I'd like to ask you all what your favorite appliance is. And so, Andrew, what's your favorite appliance?
Oh, geez. I really like my my air source heat pump.
I'm with you there.
It's because it works as an air conditioner in the summer, which is lovely in my attic office space in the Boston area. And it, of course, is can be powered by clean electricity. So
great. What about you, Leah?
I love my induction cooktop. I should say I'm a renter. I don't have control over my stove. I do have a gas stove, but I have a single burner induction electric plug-in cooktop that I pretty much use exclusively. I love it. It's great. It's fast, super easy to clean, and I love not having to rely on my gas stove.
What about you, Angie?
I was going to say, I'm also a renter. I'm
Yeah.
New York City based. So I unfortunately also do not have control over my appliances or HVAC system. So mine's going to be a little sadder. And I'm probably going to say my Dyson fan, because it can clean out the pollutants in my apartment every time I cook on my gas stove, unfortunately. So I'm hoping to move out later this year. And I'm definitely going to be trying to get as many electric appliances as I can.
Great. Yeah. Well, mine is my new heat pump water heater. We just have it now for about 2 months. Replaced a Utica direct oil fired water heater, and I'm loving it. The energy savings is fantastic. It's got an app on the phone. I could see the energy usage, when it's refilling. So that's really fun to have that heat pump water heater. And then I think we're going to take our mass save incentive from that and buy an induction stove. So looking forward to that. So we've got now the solar power, the heat pump water heater, and we'll soon have the induction. So, well, great. Well, thank you, Leah. Thank you, Andrew. This was really great. We appreciate your insights and your partnerships with NEEP, and Andrea for your facilitation and questions. We'll turn it back to Jess.
Oh, nope. I think we're given the quick
outro. I think we're giving the quick outro. All right, great. Well, the next Ready, Set, Scale is considerations for an equitable building performance standard. So NEPA is working considerably on BPS and building energy performance standards. So tune in at 11 a.m. on May 24th, as well as our summit is coming up June 13th to the 15th in Baltimore Harbor. So we're very excited to be back in person, and we hope you all consider attending. The overview of the sessions as well as registration information is up on our website, and we'll look forward to seeing you in Baltimore. So again, thank you very much, Leah and Andrew, and hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you everyone for your attendance.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep, take care now.